Imagine a company that transformed the way we grow food, yet is often criticized as the villain of modern agriculture. Monsanto is a name linked with GMOs, genetically modified organisms, environmental controversies, and corporate power, and how they utilize the world's best-selling pesticide to reinvent itself as a key player in the GM industry, aiming to regain its former reputation. This is the story of the rise and fall of Monsanto. Monsanto has been around forever. It all started back in 1901, when John F. Queeny decided to make saccharin, a fake sweetener. And guess what? He named the company after his wife's maiden name, Olga Monsanto Queeny. By the 1920s, they expanded into making basic industrial chemicals. During World War II, Monsanto got involved in researching uranium for the Manhattan Project, which eventually led to the creation of the atomic bomb. They even ran a nuclear facility for the US government until the late 80s. In the 1940s, Monsanto also became a big name in synthetic fibers and plastics, like polystyrene, which is one of the worst chemicals when it comes to hazardous waste, according to the EPA. From that point on, Monsanto was one of the top 10 chemical companies in the US. And this is where it gets interesting. After World War II, Monsanto became the cheerleader for chemical pesticides in farming. They had a bunch of big-name products like 2,4,5-T, DDT, Lasso, and the infamous Agent Orange. Now, Agent Orange was a defoliant the US military dumped all over Vietnam, but it turns out it was also a super carcinogen. And guess what? The stuff Monsanto made had way more toxic dioxin than what Dow Chemicals, the other supplier, was making. So when Vietnam vets started getting sick with all kinds of awful symptoms, Monsanto was the big bad guy in the lawsuit. Turns out, they knew about the dioxin contamination when they sold it to the government anyway. It affected over 3 million people, including US soldiers and Vietnamese civilians, and caused around 500,000 kids in Vietnam to be born with deformities. People even started calling for Monsanto to face war crime charges. But while US veterans got some money in compensation, nothing was given to the Vietnamese civilians. And the EPA's William Sanjour, who was in charge of toxic waste, said thousands of veterans were denied benefits because Monsanto bent their studies to claim that dioxin wasn't carcinogenic. One of Sanjour's colleagues found out Monsanto had pretty much cooked the books. If they had done things right, they would have gotten the exact opposite results. However, Monsanto's agriculture division was in rough shape until their herbicide Lasso came to the rescue. It gave them a much-needed boost, but just when things were looking good, Lasso started getting heat, and Agent Orange was banned in the US. But don't worry, Monsanto had a backup plan. In 1976, they launched Roundup, a weed killer with glyphosate as the main ingredient, and boom! It turned them into the world's top herbicide maker. But it got sketchy when Monsanto execs realized they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. The company had a pretty bad reputation by then, mainly because they were producing some of the most toxic chemicals around, like dioxins and PCBs. These chemicals stuck around in the environment and were harmful to both people and nature. Lawsuits and cleanup costs were starting to hurt their profits, but what freaked them out was the thought that one major screw-up could bankrupt the whole company. Monsanto's fears were justified because, by the 80s, they were getting smacked with lawsuits left and right. In 1987, they were part of a $180 million settlement for Vietnam War vets who were exposed to Agent Orange. Then, in 1991, they got hit with a $1.2 million fine for trying to hide the fact that they were dumping contaminated wastewater. And in 1995, They had to cough up $41.1 million to a Texas waste management company over sketchy hazardous waste dumping. Oh, and that same year, Monsanto earned the lovely title of being the 5th worst U.S. company in the EPA's toxic release inventory, spewing out 37 million pounds of toxic chemicals into the environment. Nice, right? So, Roundup was a total game changer for Monsanto. Launched in 1976, it quickly spread to 115 countries and became their top moneymaker. By 1981, sales were soaring and it was bringing in huge profits. By 1990, Roundup was making Monsanto's agriculture division way more cash than its chemical side. However, Monsanto knew the Roundup patent was expiring in 2000, meaning competitors could swoop in. To keep the money flowing, Monsanto dove into biotech. They sold off their plastics and other businesses to focus on agriculture and shake off their old messes. This way, they could keep riding the Roundup cash cow and dodge their past controversies. By 2000, Monsanto had reinvented itself through a bunch of deals, including a merger with Pharmacia. Despite being a new legal entity, it kept the same name, headquarters, and many of the same people, plus a chunk of its old liabilities. As Monsanto dove into biotech, they spun a new story, claiming genetic engineering was the game changer for feeding the world. Rob Fraley, head of plant research, pushed GM crops as Monsanto's chance to dominate a new industry, comparing it to Microsoft's big win. But the real pitch was more about using biotech to keep Roundup rolling in cash after its patent ran out. Monsanto pulled a genius move by putting genes into crops that make them resistant to glyphosate, the key ingredient in Roundup. This lets farmers spray Roundup without killing their crops, making it a huge hit. Monsanto cleverly bundled their Roundup-ready seeds with Roundup to keep cash flowing after their glyphosate patents expired. Although their first biotech product was a hot-button GM cattle drug, Monsanto went on a shopping spree in the 90s, spending $10 billion on seed companies. Now, they're the world's top seed company, dominating the GM seed market. With Roundup as the top pesticide, Monsanto's been riding high for years. However, corporate power was making life pricey for farmers and consumers. Roundup's price shot from $32 to $75 per gallon in less than 2 years, a 134% jump. By 2000, just 5 big pesticide companies, including Monsanto, held over 70% of all biotech patents, which meant less competition and higher costs. Monsanto even announced a 35% price hike for some of their GM corn seeds, pushing prices over $300 a bag. For a farmer with 1,000 acres, that's an extra $40,000. No real reason for it, just profit. Monsanto's also been cracking down on farmers for allegedly misusing their patented seeds, spending $10 million a year on lawsuits. Meanwhile, global food prices are soaring, partly due to biofuels, and Monsanto's right in the thick of it. The UN even called out big corporations for making a killing off the food crisis, with Monsanto's profits jumping 45% in 2007. Now, it's time for you to let me know in the comments what your stance on Monsanto is. Hope you found this video informative. I will see you in the next one.